We'll keep following that kind of update, that growth, that evolution of sports talk radio here in town. But what do you say we get to our guest, the author, Michael Hugh? Scott Manze, Richard Miller, now joined by Michael Hugh, author of Behind the Line of Scrimmage, Inside the Front Office of the NFL. Both Richard and I had the opportunity to go out to Barnes & Noble recently when his book came out and take part in the question and answer. It was so much fun that we figured we had to continue this, Richard, and get Michael on, and he's so gracious to join us today. Thanks for joining us here, Michael, and we're excited to talk to you.
Hey, it's great to be on with you guys. Thank you for having me.
First, I'm always curious when it comes to writing a book. What prompts you to want to take life experiences and put pen to paper, if you will?
Well, for me, I think it was the culmination of a career of being the first in a lot of the positions that I was in. And it was just a strong desire on my part to share my experiences and in some ways I think perhaps provide a blueprint for others in terms of having lofty goals in life and navigating through that rubric of all of the obstacles and challenges that you're going to face no matter what background you're from. And, trying to find a way to get to wherever your focus is, keeping your moral compass and standing by some guiding principles. And I think I had a unique perspective in the professional sports industry, and I thought by writing the book I could share that with others.
Did you have a favorite part, Michael, of writing this book?
Well, in many ways it's kind of therapeutic. You kind of look back and you realize the breadth of your career and the amount of people that you've been connected with and worked with and the scope of everything that's going on in your career. So the volume of it, I think, once you put pencil to paper and you kind of really see how much involved you were in the process and many different aspects of which I worked in the industry. I think there's some closure, I think, in many ways to the person who does that, goes through that journey.
Michael, there's a significant portion of this book that takes, or at least a solid portion of this book that takes place in Jacksonville due to your time here as the general manager, starting with the team when it was an expansion team and then kind of moving into the successful period. But it was more than just the football-related aspects of it. It was a lot of the stories about moving here, moving to Marsh Landing, going out in the Riverside area and experiencing some racial prejudice, certainly at times. You're still in the area. Do you find that things have changed, perhaps in a positive manner at all, from the mid-'90s when a lot of this in the book was written to now in Jacksonville?
Well, I think there's no question that we've seen progress, and communication always sort of helps with that. A lot of patterns remain the same. We, particularly as young black families and African Americans, oftentimes don't avail ourselves to the same social settings and cultural activities that non-minorities do. So even today in Ponte Vedra, 90% of the time when my wife and I go out to dinner, we might be the only black couple in that restaurant. And that hasn't changed since the 90s. But I think the scope of people and the breadth of it, if you're a minority person, you're going to interact with racism on a regular basis. I mean, I think there's no misnomer that doesn't exist in society. It doesn't mean that you can't live a comfortable life. It doesn't mean that there are tons and tons of people out there that you're going to exchange very positive relationships with. But there's always the other side of that too, because of cultural blockage, because of ignorance, because of lack of exposure, because of the way things are portrayed in the media, that are always going to have an impact on your life.
Michael, you wrote in the book how your son drew a picture and you were in the other building. Can you share that a little bit and how important family is for you?
Well, it is. When you're aspiring to be successful in life, you make your career first. You may say your family, your faith, or other things are first, but the expectations are on your career. It's where you're going to be from 5 a.m. till 10 at night. And so that's what's going to drive you. And at times, you can get that twisted. You can get and perhaps lose your focus at times because you keep convincing yourself that every hour you put in at the office is an hour for your family. But in reality, it's an hour at the office. It's an hour away from your family. And I think little things, vignettes like my son drawing a picture that showed me not living at home but living at the office, even as a kindergartner, is a reminder that you have a commitment to family too. And that balance between work and family is always a delicate tightrope that anyone walks. And there's times where you have to build a moral compass for yourself that just sort of says, where am I going to draw that line? And I think no matter how important your job is, your first job is to be a husband and a father to your children. And I think if you lose sight of that, if you veer off that course too far, then you get lost in that journey professionally as well.
I want to get back to a little bit about the Jaguars related stuff here. We are a kind of a Jacksonville-based podcast that certainly focuses on that kind of stuff, and I kind of want to know. You told some great stories at the Q&A about when you were trading for Brunell first, almost in theory, and then it actually went through after that. But as I want to know about Tom Coughlin. Everybody talks about him and what he has brought to this franchise since he came back. What is it about Tom Coughlin from your perspective that makes him such a unique leader?
Well, he's an organized person. He's a disciplined person. When you get in the business of coaching, it's teaching. That's the primary responsibility of a coach, is to teach. And the only people that really go into teaching are people that enjoy the individuals that they're teaching. And I think one of the greatest things about Tom was that for the whole year before we had the team, we came in 94 and we started in 95. I spent almost every day with him, 12, 15, 16 hours a day. And so both of our wives were back where we had our homes, and we were just both here every day, spending time together 16 hours a day. So I really got to know him. And what was interesting is that there's a side to Tom that so many people don't see. And he's a disciplinarian. He's a stats tactician. Everything has to be a certain way with him. But he cares so much about these players, he just would never let them know it. In fact, every player that got cut for the 10 years that I was with the team got cut by me in my office. Tom would never cut them. He wouldn't directly cut because he didn't want to have to sit there and tell them their dreams were over. Most of the time, the players would come in and say, yeah, thanks, Mr. Hugo, I appreciate it. And the coach couldn't even come over here and say goodbye. So they're thinking he doesn't even care about them. And the reality is he cares so much about them. I would go on recruiting trips to inner city black communities in Mississippi, Alcorn State, and we'd be recruiting these kids like McNair and other kids. And Tom would stop, go over to a field, and there'd be a bunch of little black kids running around out there. He'd stop, play catch with them, and have conversations about, following their dreams and having commitment. And so that was the side that I saw at the time. He gave all of the coaches $2,500 savings bonds for their kids, for every coach. And he would do that for every year. And there were things he never wanted people to know. And so I think the thing that really made him such a great coach and individual is that his heart was so much bigger than everybody ever saw.
Michael, do you still talk football or keep in touch with Coughlin?
I do. And, once in football, always in football.
I want to know about what you think about Shad Khan and what he has done perhaps for the NFL as a fellow minority, kind of breaking through a glass ceiling, if you will, as becoming a minority owner in the league.
Well, certainly his presence means something. I think what gets diluted at times when you say minority is the fact that he's worth about $10 billion. So somehow people tend to overlook that a little bit, and has a 250-foot yacht that's off and down the Atlantic. But he came from very humble beginnings to come from Pakistan and to be here. Was, obviously a very brilliant man. He's got tremendous business savvy. I think the thing that makes him such an incredible owner is that he's a big vision guy. He knows what he knows. He knows what he doesn't know. And I think when you have ownership in a team in the NFL, that's really the ingredient for success, that the owner understands what role he can play in supporting the organization. And I think that's what Chad has brought to Jacksonville, and certainly back with the team at that element as well.
Michael, what was Wayne Weaver like? He's kind of disappeared since the sale of the team and everything with the Jaguars, but he and Dolores Barr Weaver are still active in the community. Do you keep in touch with him?
Yeah, periodically. He had been a little illness and hadn't been playing as much golf, and I would periodically see him over at TPC. But I think, again, philanthropic-wise, there will probably never be a family that will come to Jacksonville that will do more than the Weavers have done. And we've all benefited, whether you've been a sports fan or not, by having the Weavers in Jacksonville. But I think that there's a lure at times when you come into a professional franchise as an owner to feel a sense of responsibility to speak authoritatively about what's going on with the football team, managing the football team. And I think in the first sort of 10 years, because Wayne left all of those decisions to Tom and myself, he didn't have to sort of play that role. And when I left and then a year later Tom left, it really thrust Wayne into a role that, really for the prior 10 years, he had not been exercising on a regular basis. So it kind of thrust him in, even though 10 years in, to a new role as an owner. And that meant picking a GM, picking a coach. And he just really, I don't think, had a lot of experience firsthand. So you end up relying on other people or relying on your gut. But those are difficult things to do in this industry because it's really vetted by just an awful lot of experience. And that's what's the most guiding principles. So maybe there was a learning curve after that period of time. And I think the team struggled a bit during that period.
What about the expansion process and bringing the Jacksonville Jaguars to town as a real NFL team? What about that process might be kind of overlooked by just the casual fan that sees a new team with a bunch of new players?
Well, just how much of a long shot it was. I mean, there were so many other bigger cities that were competing for that opportunity. And Jacksonville really wasn't on anyone's horizon at the league office. I mean, they already had two teams in the state of Florida, and so it wasn't going to necessarily help the television market by bringing in Jacksonville. But I think the fact that this sort of last push of selling 10,000 club seats in 10 days and generating a huge gate that was shared among all 32 clubs really made Jacksonville not only a good fit location, but financially as well, much to the surprise. And Wayne and David Selden and Tom Petway and the whole group of ownership that was part of this really kind of pulled off a miracle.
Michael, why did you and your family decide to make your home and stay here in Jacksonville or out in Ponte Vedra?
Well, I remember the first day that I decided to take the job here. I put this in the book. I told my wife that we were moving to Jacksonville, and she said, "Where's Jacksonville?" And the first moment we got out of the plane, she just had her hair curled, and we walked out of the airplane, and immediately it fell flat with the humidity. And we're driving by the Bay Street, and we see this beautiful building. And I said, "Look, honey, there's a beautiful building." He said, "Oh, that's actually a prison." So it was an inauspicious start, but it grew on us in a way that we never really wanted to leave. And we raised all three kids here. I spent 4 years working in New York at the UFL, United Football League, but stayed here and commuted. And even though Monday through Thursday I would be in New York and come back on the weekends, did that for 4 years. And that's really the sort of love affair that we've had, with this area. It's not broke, so we don't try to fix it. And it's been, just really a great place for us.
Richard and I are both Jacksonville natives. We've grown up in this city. We've seen how this city has grown as well, especially in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. It feels like things have really taken a sharp turn upward and maybe right at the precipice of exploding. Where do you see the growth in this city and where it could potentially become big time like it keeps threatening to be?
Well, look, we've already had a Super Bowl. We have an NFL team here that's danced on the door of getting to the Super Bowl. We have an owner here in Shad Khan who's an international figure now trying to buy Wembley Stadium. So all of those things have been huge pluses for this city. And incrementally, it sort of raises the profile not only from an international standpoint, but locally in terms of what people think we can do, building the amphitheater, drawing more national music talent here, and just giving ourselves the sense that we have a waterfront opportunity that we can develop downtown. And I think those kinds of things have given us real insight that we are a first-class city, and more people are becoming aware of it. So I think that mission has to start internally with the people that live here. And I think 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure people really believed that was the way that you could define Jacksonville. And I think today, that mindset of who we are and what we're capable of has changed dramatically in the sense that we're as good as any city in the country, and we deserve all of the same recognition that other major cities have as well.
Michael, I'm sure you saw the talk. The Jaguars had 3 home games in September, And for some of those with the heat, humidity, at times on the field, the temperature 117. Was there ever talk when you were with the Jaguars of, oh, attendance isn't that great for this game? Or would you guys notice that in the front office?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially not coming from that environment, the heat was stifling. Our first year of training camp, we even decided to have it at Stevens Point, Wisconsin, for fear that we couldn't run an effective training camp in this heat. That backfired because it ended up being the hottest temperature in 30 years in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. But I think the reality is it is a challenge. It certainly at times can be an advantage for other teams that come in here. But I do think that there's when we have a game like last week and the weather's actually great, it's an anomaly that we really recognize and revel with. And so it's a part of living in Florida. And, I don't think it's as much of a negative, but there's no question there are some people who sort of start their home game package in October.
What similarities perhaps do you see between those late 90s teams, Jaguars teams, and this version of the Jaguars?
Well, I think the structure is back in place like it was when Tom and I were here. And I think, I talk often about what's the special sauce that makes one team win and another team not be successful in the NFL. And so often we tend to think that it's about player and personnel selection. And it's really about the culture, the chemistry, and the leadership of that team. And so that sort of starts with coaching and the support that comes from ownership. And when you do those things right, it filters down to the players so that there's an element of respect, there's an element of discipline, there's an element of leadership, and then there's a buy-in to whatever that mission is. And if you mismanage what you're paying the players so that they feel disrespected, if you hold players out for extended periods of time, all of those things create backlashes that erode the chemistry on the team, and you just don't build a successful organization. Some organizations think if I pay this player $60 million, he's going to give me everything I've got because I paid him $60 million. The reality is whether you pay him $60 million or $6 million, if he doesn't feel respected, he's not going to perform for you. So a lot of teams suffer from the fact that they think the respect is built into the paycheck. And in normal business, employees who just go work the job, that's sort of how it's implied. But it's not that way in professional sports, and particularly in the NFL. And so the teams that recognize that and are on the front end of that and have all those elements in place, they're the ones that are going to be successful no matter who they draft or no matter who the players are.
Did you have a favorite player that you worked with the Jaguars or that you really enjoyed watching when you were with the team?
Well, it was hard not to like Baselli. I mean, he came in at the behemoth size that he was, and the first day we had the rookies in, we ran 55-yard gassers across the width of the field, and we had the skilled players, running backs, receivers, and I think Baselli won every sprint at 325 pounds. So it was like he was a freak of nature in the sense that he had this great athletic talent. He partially negotiated his own rookie deal with me directly. All 10 players came in and signed en masse. It was a first in the history of the NFL. That was led by Tony. So he was just one of a lifetime type of players, I think, that, you can build a championship team around, in addition to just having the sheer toughness that was unrivaled in the National Football League.
Your book, it feels poignant for this time period, especially with the maybe most racially charged time period that we've been in since the Civil Rights Movement. Is that what prompted you to write it right now?
Well, it is because I'm such an advocate for change. I've been fortunate that I've been in both walks of life. I've been accepted in the black community and in the white community. And from that vantage point, you can see common ground, but it's really hard when you're entrenched on one side. And I think even in my career, I worked for the Players Association, and then I worked for the owners. I worked as an agent. I worked with an ownership group. So, I've been able to sit on perches in many different ways and see where that thread of common goal and common ground is. And that was one of my hopes in this book. One, that I have to explain to people what some of the issues are, because there's unconscious bias and there's conscious bias that outrun bigotry. But the reality is, in many instances, I think people would be surprised to know because they don't think of it that way. Like my kids went through school in Jacksonville, first from Jacksonville Country Day School and then to Episcopal. So we put them in private school all the way through high school. And in the 12 years of learning, my kids had one African American teacher. So I would imagine that if you said to a white family in Jacksonville, if you paid to send your kids to private school for 12 years, and in those 12 years they had one white teacher, how would you feel about that? And so there's just things that we don't recognize and see. So when we fight for more diverse faculty in our school systems and providing role models, and that's just one example. And so for me, I thought the book would create a healthy discussion that might better folks' understanding about issues and promote a more healthy dialogue about race.
Michael, when you go on speaking engagements, tours, bookstores, is that the primary question you get asked about the racial tension, Colin Kaepernick, the kneeling? Because that's something you start the book off with.
Yeah, I start off because it's a poignant part of it. You know, it's a part that I think forces you and it kind of grabs you right away in the book and sort of maybe even makes you a little uncomfortable. And then it gives you a chance to get into the book and see kind of the things I went through. And, you know, it's not angry black man says, what's wrong with the country? No, it's someone who's had the benefit of being successful in almost every position I was hired because I was black. And I say that in the book. And that's not a negative in the role that I was able to play because you don't stay in those positions if you're not good at what you do. But the reality is it was diversity that got me into those positions. And so for me, I want to send messages to young African-American kids, get engaged in your school, not just in sports. Get involved in the band, get involved in student government, get yourself engaged, network, use the benefits that are there so that you can promote yourself in a career. And I think in some ways the things that I did in my career can be a blueprint for other people to follow.
Is there another book that you plan on writing anytime soon? I mean, I know you just finished the first one, but
yeah. You know, I think really there were sort of two books I wrote initially, and this was sort of the second one. The first was a more sort of football themed one, but there's other stories about relationships that I've had with people and how I think it can impact our views and it helps it goes a way of, I think, you know, making us better as individuals and you know, I'm just really focused on sort of that give back aspect of my life, and I'd really like to sort of stay channeled in that genre.
It's fascinating, Michael, because you have all these names in the book, Snoop Dogg, Pac-Man Jones, all these names we've known with the Jaguars for the last 25 years. Have you ever met anyone and just you get completely starstruck?
Well, you know, I was at Obama's inauguration, the first one, and one of our owners was very close with the Speaker of the House at the time. So we were invited to sit on the stage. We sat right next to the Chief of Staff, my wife and I, for the inauguration. So that was sort of a special thing. And right after he'd been elected president, he was walking down the chamber past the Speaker of the House's office into was going to have lunch with all the Congress people and senators. And, you know, he immediately become president. So now the third Secret Service are walking with him. And he got just to the door and someone had asked if he had seen me. And he stopped the whole procession and called my name out and said, Michael. And he just wanted to congratulate me on becoming commissioner of the UFL. My wife is watching me walk out there like, what the hell are you doing? You know, and so I think, you know, he was forget what you think of his politics. He was just a transformational person because for an African-American person to become president of the United States, to win the Nobel Peace Prize, it's sort of like meeting Mandela. So I think particularly as an African-American, irrespective of what your political views are, it was just an amazing thing to get to meet him and then, you know, meet him several other times. And so I think that was probably, and I think I've met every sort of celebrity, if you will, in the industry, but I think the president was a little different.
The book is Behind the Line of Scrimmage, inside the front office of the NFL. He's the first GM of the Jacksonville Jaguars, and he has a story that is just fascinating of his career both in front offices of the NFL, the UFL, living here in Jacksonville for a while and working the way up through the biz and the racial tensions and moments and everything that goes along with it. Michael, thank you so much for the time. We really enjoyed the book. We enjoyed getting to meet you briefly at Barnes & Noble recently, and we look forward to hopefully the next book coming out sometime soon.
Well, I really appreciate it, and it's always good to talk to you guys as well.